Okay, we are here for part 2 of the Rodriguez trial. She was one of the women who is accused of killing a man in his home and then leaving and then coming back just a few hours later to see the house itself as it was almost burnt to the ground. It was wild. We saw the states opening, and we got a little bit further, and then they had a huge break. So I'm going to go ahead and start it where we left off. Actually, oh man, I forgot to switch over. I hope you guys, if you were on here, you heard what I said. Jermaine Bass was found guilty of first-degree murder, if you haven't been on with me today. It's wild. I still am a little bit, I think, devastated that Colin Griffith hasn't had a trial in Oklahoma and he wasn't found guilty, which is just crazy to me. Okay. I found it. All right, I'm going to put myself in the corner. As always, if you need the audio turned up, if you need anything, just let me know. We're almost getting it. I don't know why this is taking so long. All right, let me try one more thing as I try to get this set up. What did you guys think of the Monica Cementelli trial, if you watched it today? I think the jail phone calls and the letters that went on for over a year is just so damning for her, claiming that she wasn't involved, but she clearly was. All right, I think I have it ready.
Things to look into. And he goes through all the other surveillance. And he then tracks back, who are those people in the silver Malibu? What do they look like? What's that car? All those types of things. And when he tracks all the way back, it comes to two people, two females. And he goes through this process, and he's able to say that the defendant is wearing the black. She's got this visor on. She's got her hair up in a bun. And this other individual is Hosanna Varela. And again, that process takes a lot of time of figuring out their specific names. But he knows that these individuals, based on their movement, are associated with that Malibu and that encounter that we just saw. And so what Detective Burrows does is he keeps looking. And he sees that after this encounter, and after identifying those people, that Chris is heading home. We're walking away from the bars. And you'll get to see, maybe you recognize this, maybe you don't. It's going to be the window at the Rio right across the street. And you'll see Chris walk by it in Exhibit 90. And then right after that, you'll see that in dealing with that, there is a specific vehicle that's shown after Chris had walked by, and it's that Chevy Malibu. And then he's able to obtain surveillance that had been gathered in and around Chris's house on the early morning in question and the night before from 3 different neighbors, and he starts piecing this together. spending hours and hours of viewing this.
Bolstering.
All right, the court will overrule the objection.
And what you're going to hear is that Detective Burrows was able to identify, based on a variety of things, and corroborate.
That was defense's opening, and that's what we watched earlier. So we're starting here. Keep in mind it's a small courtroom, so I've been waiting for them to have audio issues. That typically happens.
Correction, it's 2413 15th Avenue Court, Greeley. So we're off like by 25th Street, 11th Avenue. What's that? Well, it's a house. Okay. She doesn't believe she's ever been to the 2413 15th Avenue Court address. She doesn't know anybody who drives a silver Chevy Malibu. Is that right? And have you ever driven a Chevy Malibu?
Never been to the house, never seen Chris, never driven a Chevy Malibu, doesn't know anybody who does. And then she's told that she's being arrested.
Arson, burglary, and tampering with society. Okay.
Is there proof of that?
Yes.
Her response, after all that time, is there proof of that? And you'll get to factor that into your consideration. Now, ladies and gentlemen, you'll hear again that Hosanna Varela was also arrested on that day, and you'll hear that she provided an interview with her lawyers present. And ladies and gentlemen, she outlines what she saw, what she heard. And you'll hear, confirming what we had from phone records, that they had not met before that point. She didn't know Chris. Stacy didn't know Chris. That's consistent with phone records because we never saw any interaction. That essentially just happened in that they were driving, Chris was walking, there's the discussion of going back to his place for an after party. And so they go back to his place, and he had some beer, he had some vodka. And according to Hosanna Varela, the defendant was giving him vodka while they were taking water, or part water. And you will get to ask yourself why that is, looking at all the circumstances. Why would you be feeding somebody an intoxicating substance that you weren't taking yourself? And make no mistake about it, there's going to be a lot of blame cast on Christopher Dickerson. He was drunk.
The Justin Baldoni, Blake Lively legal saga continues.
Says. And he'll be blamed for that. And you'll get to decide if this was part of the plan. Hosanna Varela will make it very clear to you she never saw Christopher yielding a weapon. He never threatened to kill them, rape them, anything like that. That she doesn't recall any physical force by Chris, but is certain, no weapon, no threats, I'm going to kill you, nothing. And you'll hear
So I want to go
that
back.
there was an argument, according to Hosanna, between Christopher Dickerson and the defendant. And ultimately, you're going to hear from Hosanna that according to her, Christopher was pushed. And then at some point, the defendant took a beer bottle over to him and smashed it on him. And that Christopher Dickerson was yelling for them to leave, pleading with them to leave. Miss Varela will say, and has said, that she wasn't afraid that night of being hurt, that they could have left. There wasn't a hypothetical door, there was a real door. There wasn't a hypothetical car, it was theirs. It's parked outside. You'll hear the progression. And you'll hear that Hosanna Varela asked her to stop and leave. And you'll hear during the testimony of her that according to her previous statement, she had seen this object, the murder weapon, at Chris's house that was out, that it looked like a file of sort. She describes it as something that would be like used to sharpen knives. There was a handle. She thought it had white tape, wasn't certain, but she saw it. And ultimately, she put it underneath. But she says there was no need to kill him. There was no need. And yet, Stacy Rodriguez did. She'll describe what that sounded like. She'll talk about seeing Chris bleeding out. Describes a death gargle. She'll describe that immediately after, Stacy seemed happy about it. And that instead of calling for 911 or anything like that, what was the first thing that Stacy Rodriguez started doing? She started going
to October 2nd and October 3rd. So we know that Miss Rodriguez, Stacy, is 19 years old. She's dating a woman who's married with kids, and they're going out having a normal night on October 2nd. They're going out to the bars where they meet Mr. Dickerson in an alleyway. And Mr. Dickerson approaches them and says, you guys looking for an after party? I've got one. Great, no problem, that's normal. So that's what they're hoping they go to when they follow Mr. Dickerson to his home, is for an after party. And then it turns out nobody's there. There's no after party. It's just Mr. Dickerson, and it's Stacy and Hosanna. That's it. So this man, mid-30s, okay, these ages, they're important here, right? Use your life experiences. We're all in different life stages right now, right? Guy in his mid-30s invites this young girl over for an after party. And then you're going to hear what happened inside the home. And pay attention to all the things that the prosecution didn't tell you in opening. The prosecution said there was nothing physical in the house, no physical threats. Mr. Dickerson never did anything. Well, that's not true, because Hosanna tells Detective Burrows the opposite. Hosanna tells Detective Burrows that she was uncomfortable around Mr. Dickerson in her home, that he was grabbing her butt multiple times, and she didn't really feel like she was showing him that she was interested. So Hosanna says she's uncomfortable around him. And then she says that actually, Chris, Mr. Dickerson, and Stacy were arguing at one point in the night, and he cornered her against a wall. Why didn't they tell you about that? Doesn't fit into the narrative. He corners her against the wall in the home, so much so that Hosanna says, leave her alone, get away from her. And Stacy has to push Mr. Dickerson off of her. there is physical contact in the home. And also think about what it looked like at that time. You're going to see photos of the house. You're going to be able to kind of get a layout of where the kitchen was to where the living room was, where Mr. Dickerson's body was found. It's a ranch style home. It's small, no levels. You walk in, it's a living room. A kitchen is right next door. So think about all of that when you are drinking the entire night, 19 years old, and this man who said there was going to be an after party does not follow through. You are in a stranger's home by yourself, and he is cornering you, towering over you. And that's what Hosanna says. He is over her. She remembers multiple times saying he is over her. And he's taller than Stacy by a lot. The prosecution had brought up the drinking and what Mr. Dickerson's, blood alcohol content was. And you're going to hear about the talk screen that was run by Detective Burson. And you're going to learn all about this when we discuss the autopsy. But keep in mind that Mr. Dickerson's blood alcohol content that night was 0.3. So 4 times over the legal limit. And again, he's at his house with his alcohol, asking for an after party. Ms. Rodriguez wasn't trying to poison him or get him so drunk he didn't know what was going on. He's in his mid-30s and invited them over for an after party. That's what's going on. Use your common sense. You saw some autopsy photos and we talked about that metal file. And the prosecution said that Hosanna's version of events is that after, I guess the prosecution didn't tell you that in opening, but after she pushes Mr. Dickerson away, that somehow they end up in the living room, right? And Hosanna says that Stacy says, give me that weapon, give me that file. You'll hear the proffer. You'll hear how it actually goes. But then consider the file. Think about that. When you saw those photos, the sharp end is sticking out. And Hosanna describes the file as looked like it had white tape on the handle, the base of it. And you'll be able to see the file, and you'll be able to see the blunt part that is in Mr. Dickerson's neck is textured. It looks like it's wrapped. And you will get to see the file, and you will get to look for yourself. Does it look like anything is broken off? Does it look like something is rough? Or does it look like it is a metal file that has a sharp end sticking out? So if somebody is reacting, trying to save themselves, think about the way that a weapon would have been used. The sharp end is not in, it's out. Think about it might be dangerous for yourself if you have something sharp in your hand and the sharp end is sticking out and you're defending yourself and you're using the blunt end in. That almost puts you at risk as well. It's not smart, it's not premeditated, it's not with after deliberation, it's not thought out, because she easily could have hurt herself as well. Why wouldn't you use a sharp end? It doesn't make sense. It's a panic decision to protect yourself, to save yourself. And when you look at the house and you look at the photos, you will see that there is a door to the living room, but we talked about that in jury selection. You all agreed there is no duty to retreat. But I do encourage you to look at the layout of the home and consider that if somebody is reacting in a panic and what that would look like and not feeling safe and the close quarters that you are in. Now, we know that the house was burned, right? You saw the body worn in the prosecution's opening of the house, up in flames when GPD officers arrive. And that's a scene that probably nobody wishes to come upon. It is going to invoke emotions. It is sad. There is no way, I think, that you can look at this case and not find that there is an emotional component, because there just is. Somebody died, and 2 people are going to have to live with that for the rest of their lives. That's horrible. But you have to sometimes put that emotion aside and go back to the logic, and go back to the elements that the prosecution has to prove, and go back to what we talked about in jury selection about those drastic measures. Think about how realistic it is that somebody panics and does something because they don't know what else is going on. And that's what happened. Horrible decisions are made, but it doesn't mean that something wasn't justified. Don't confuse the self-defense in a stranger's home, older than you, taller than you, being aggressive, being touchy, drinking, feeling like you can't get away. All of those things can still be true. So you're going to think about, when you hear about self-defense, when you think about what the legal standards are, reasonableness, right? The objective idea. But it's reasonable in the situation itself, in the context that you're presented with. The prosecution talked about guilt and regret. And of course, there's guilt and regret. Of course. Somebody's life was taken. That's horrible. We talked about this a lot in jury selection. We're all agree murder is wrong, but it can be justified in self-defense. But that doesn't mean that it takes away regret, doesn't mean it takes away guilt, because that's a trauma that somebody has to live with for the rest of their lives. And so, again, I want to go back to this distortion, because you saw a portion of those Facebook messages, but that's not the entire story. And you'll get to hear more of the entire story throughout this trial. Okay, openings are just a snapshot of what the next week is going to entail. Okay, but when you think about the guilt and the regret, I want you to go back to actually what the statements say. It's not just that, I didn't talk to anybody, I should have told people. It's every time I close my eyes, I see him. Hardest part of my life. I don't want to keep going. I feel alone. Those are human reactions, human responses to something horrible that just happened. To something horrible that probably nobody ever in their mind imagines that they would have to do to somebody else. Nobody asked for this. Nobody wants this. Definitely not Miss Rodriguez. So now she has to live with that. And we talked in jury selection about, what if you don't call the police, right? Does that take away the justification? No, because you all had said, what if people don't believe you? That's also scary. So think about that. You don't think someone's going to believe you? You're just trying to live your life. There's no situation where somebody would act in self-defense and killing somebody else and then be happy about it. That is not a human reaction. That is not a human response. The guilt, the remorse, the panic, that's a human response. Ms. Rodriguez was 19 years old at a stranger's house under a situation she didn't think. Thought there was going to be more people. Thought it was going to be a party. And it went differently. It turned differently. He did corner her. She had to push him away, and it didn't stop. So think about all of that. That is what this case is about. It is about panic decisions, decisions made under pressure, relying on distorted facts that don't make sense to fit a narrative because you need that narrative. They need that narrative. But it doesn't go with logic, and it doesn't go with reason. Ms. Rodriguez, Stacy defended herself. She defended the woman that she loved to try to keep them safe. And that's what she did. She is not guilty of first-degree murder.
All right, so that finishes opening argument. You have to let me know what you think about that closing argument. Actually, both of them. Earlier in the day, people were saying how much they thought the state did such a good job with their opening. And I think they did, but I feel like there was so much time of trying to pass things out, and they were all unorganized, and it was slow too. So that's my problems with that one. This one I don't think is a bad opening statement, but she has a lot of work to do to prove defense, because it really doesn't sound like it at all. But we will see. My system needs an update right now, and that's why I was having so many issues on here. So I'm gonna turn this video off. This is just openings currently. I'm gonna go ahead and do the update and hope that it fixes everything. So, all right, I will be back shortly.